Well, welcome everybody to this is what happens when you click the button twice and you don't have patience. That's what's going on. But welcome back to another Shifting Schools Flash webinar. Excited to be here again with Trisha. And today's 15-minute Flash webinar is going to be all about podcasts and using podcasts with students. Trisha?
Hey, Jeff. Always great to be chatting with you. Folks, you might know if you're on social media that September is International Podcast Month. So that's why we thought it was a relevant time to be talking about how podcasts are a great tool for learning, and that's learners of all ages. A quick reminder, of course, we have a podcast that comes out every single Monday. We also have over 60 free guides available for you over there at shiftingschools.com. Again, thank you for watching this Flash webinar. The webinar is free for you, but it's not free to make. So, Jeff, do you want to tell folks about our amazing sponsor that makes this all possible?
Yeah, so we've got a great new sponsor here for the webinar over at the podcast and for everything at Shifting Schools. We're excited to have FlexiSpot be a sponsor of today's free webinar. FlexiSpot makes ergonomic furniture. Be thinking about flexible seating in your classroom or for your own home office or home office if you have children at home yourself. And with our sponsorship, you can save $20 on their Pro Standing Desk, the E7, when you use code SHIFTING20. So you'll be hearing more about FlexiSpot, some of their products here in the webinars in the future, as well as in the podcast Shifting Schools. So thank you to FlexiSpot for being the sponsor of today's free webinar. And with that, here's today's code. If you've got your phone, you can grab your phone real quick, and both Trish and I will put this up on your screen, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. You'll have to let us know. Maybe your phone won't read it. But if you scan that code, that'll actually download today's presentation for you. And you're going to want to download that because it's got all kinds of great free things for you to be using. Of course, over at Shifting Schools, we have all kinds of free guides for you. We've got 60 free guides, and today we want to talk about two of those guides all around the power of podcasting. Trisha, let's get started with this.
Great. So those of you who have the link to the slides, when you're following along with us, slide 4, where you see the cover for our free guide, Tapping into the Power of Podcasts. You can click on that and open it up. We only have 15 minutes today, so we're not going to go through everything that's in that guide. We'll go through a few of the highlights. If you're listening to this and you don't have the slides, that's okay. When you head over to shiftingschools.com and you click on our free guides, you can find it there and download it. So inside that guide, to me, the highlights are really thinking about before we even push play, before we even recommend any podcasts to our learners, that we have a conversation, that we do some modeling around how it is that we read a podcast, how it is that we use a podcast. So for some of our younger learners, this is about getting organized in that lead up to the listening. So that's thinking about what we do before we push play. And those of you who are passionate about using loose parts with your younger learners, I know that's really fun sometimes we even do found loose parts, things like rocks, sticks, leaves. Of course, other people might use buttons, Lego, anything can be a loose part. It might be about getting some of those together so that we can be doing some learning, some responding to the podcast episode with our loose parts, thinking about how we listen to an episode. Now, for our younger learners, some podcast episodes are shorter. They might be 15 to 20 minutes, but we recommend with young learners breaking that listening experience down even further and thinking about listening in a 3-minute chunk of time or a 5-minute chunk of time. And I would be sharing this with parents and caretakers because part of the reason I advocate so strongly for podcasts is they're free. So if I have a parent group or a caretaker group that can't afford to update their library at home with brand new books, there are some great fiction podcasts that are completely free. So I'd be modeling to parents, this is how you can use it at home. This is how maybe you can even use it on the go in the car. And I would be talking about using the power of pause. So really modeling with students, when do we pause and when do we make space for our own curiosities, for our own responses, our own questions? Then again, the last step here is really thinking about modeling rewind, going back, re-listening, rethinking. And I think about how this is a skill that applies to all of our literacies, right? If we want students to get into this habit, get into this practice of, wait, I didn't understand something, go back. Podcasts allow us a great opportunity to do that. Now, for our older learners, the way in which we are modeling how they go about reading, again, we break this down in a few steps. Again, instead of getting loose parts, it might be, what's a template that we want to get together for taking our notes? When our older learners are doing some of that pause work, they might be doing it on their own, but I would model to them how we grab the timestamp. So with some of my older students, it would be, let's just map out. I want to get some data around when we each paused in an episode and looking at what we learned from that. If I've got 5 or 6 students that all paused right around that 7-minute mark, let's have a conversation around that. What gave us that pause? And of course, when they pause, what are some of the questions, frameworks, protocols that we would use to gather that thinking? And then one more time again, modeling the power of rewind. Okay. That's, in my mind, one of the great things about podcasts is we can go at that learning at our own pace, but doing that pre-listening step of really talking about how you set up for success with learning with a podcast is really important. So you might be thinking now, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say, Trisha, here's what I love about this is we talk a lot about, how do we support students in creating good listening skills? And again, as we talk about a lot over at Shifting Schools, these are all skills that have to be taught. How do we teach kids to go back? And I love this idea of rewind. Doing this in the classroom, I think, is so critical, and I love this idea of having kids, especially older kids, timestamp where did we pause, because we can all go back and listen at that 7-minute mark. We can all go back and say, okay, what is it right here that tweaked your interest or that you found interesting or whatever it happens to be with what we want. And the crazy part is my wife and I listen to a lot of podcasts. We actually just drove back across the state of Washington yesterday listening to podcasts, and we listened to 2 episodes, and at the second, we pause all the time during episodes to begin with. Like, we hear something and we pause. We're like, did you hear that? Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what you're thinking. But at the end of, after listening to 2 episodes, because it was a 2-part series, we actually just shut it off and we said, well, what struck you about that? And what I love is because we've listened to so many podcasts, we have our own structure now that we use when we're listening to podcasts together. And that's what we're trying to build here. We're building a structure of listening. And how important is that when we are actually talking with students about listening to your friends or listening deeply to conversations? It starts with giving kids structures. Now, Trisha, I know people are listening to this and say, I would love to use podcasts in my classroom. I just don't have time to go and find podcasts for my kids to listen to. So what should they do, Trisha?
Well, the good news is, Jeff, I am obsessed with podcasts. Anybody who is a friend of mine knows that I have a podcast on almost all the time when I'm walking the dog, when I'm waiting in line at the grocery store. So we've done that heavy lifting for you of curating what some of our favorite podcasts are. Again, inside this free guide, there are even more recommendations. We don't have enough time in this brief webinar to go through all of them, but we have curated them, again, by age group. So the list that you see here, Sesame Street podcast is amazing. Love the Music Box. Love Story Seeds podcast. There are a few others. They're all linked in on the guide. What we've done is we've given you some recommendations. And you'll also see we have a little bit of a reflective protocol that pairs with that at that age group. So again, practicing active listening, Jeff, as you say, is important. And it's really useful if we have some ready-made tools that help us do that. And I would say one more time, this is great to share with parents and caretakers, right? To model it because they can be doing this at home as well. Moving up, for some of our primary school students, we've got a list. We have another, here's what you can do while you listen protocol that pairs with that. Anybody who has listened to The Big Fib, it's a great podcast. The Two Princes is a great podcast. And again, I really appreciate how these are free resources for families to connect with as well. The next list is looking at slightly older age group inside the guide. We break that down both by nonfiction and fiction. So a few of our favorite nonfiction podcasts that are great for grades 9 through 12. Science Friday is great. TEDx Shorts is really accessible. Love We Got You podcast as well. And the protocol that pairs with that really looks at helping students self-advocate for some of the questions, some of the curiosities. Jeff, like a pet peeve of mine is when I'm doing something for my own learning and the facilitator asks like, okay, any questions? Because every single time it's crickets, right?
Right.
This protocol actually looks at giving a little bit of scaffolding to that so that you avoid that. Any questions? Nobody says anything, right? I think, again, we talk about engagement. When we talk about engagement, we have to be looking at, well, what have we done to make pathways to provide multiple entry points to make engagement possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's all about setting up those structures. And that's one of the things I love about this free guide is it's giving you the structures to start supporting podcasting in your classroom. And again, let's remind where we started with this. Podcasts are free. They're free to use in your classroom. It doesn't get any freer than podcasts. There's so many great ones out there around every sort of topic that a student might be interested in. And so how do we use this in our classroom? Every classroom's got some kind of technology. Every piece of technology has speakers. Every piece of technology has some way to connect in some earbuds and be able to have kids actually interact with this. It's such a great resource that we got to be bringing into our classrooms and using with kids. It's so exciting to think about what are the possibilities we can do, especially around listening skills that we know show up in standards across the curriculum and across grade levels.
So alongside that, if you are passionate about podcasts becoming sort of a habitual resource that's coming up throughout the year, or again, it's a routine that you want to foster with students, inside that free guide, we also have our listening journal template. So when you get to that and you click on it, it makes a copy for students so that as they are making their way, through this active journey of becoming better listeners and working on those literacy skills, they can be documenting that practice. Because what I find, Jeff, is the more I use podcasts in practice, my students get interested in other podcasts, right? We talk about teaching readers versus teaching reading. And again, I completely think enjoying fiction podcasts, this is a part of our reading practice in the year 2022 and probably continuing. Yeah. So giving them a space to document that journey can be, I think, really, really powerful. And again, encourages them to share with one another, have those conversations with family and friends about what they're listening and what they're learning to. And we believe in that practice so strongly that we've also created something similar for adult learners. So back in June, we launched this free guide, the Podcasts for Pride Month. So this is looking at podcasts as a tool for professional growth around developing and fostering LGBTQ plus inclusion. Guess what? You don't only have to do that in June. It's a great thing to be thinking about it all year long. So inside this guide, we have recommendations of podcasts. We have protocols for conversation. We have templates for doing documentation. So if I'm a part of a DEIJ professional learning community, I have a ready-made pathway for myself and my peers to be doing that learning, to be documenting our thinking, and then coming together to discuss. I'm a big believer when we're talking about learning to balance that asynchronous reflection time before we launch into conversations. Jeff, you are also a big lover of podcasts. So for folks who are thinking, I love the flexibility of podcasting for professional development, What if, as a school leader, my teachers can be doing their professional learning while they're taking a jog, while they're walking their dogs, right? That's the flexibility of podcasts. So that's our podcast PD pathway. If you believe strongly in that flexibility piece, I think this is a great pathway to pursue with teams.
Yeah, and there's so many great educational podcasts out there. It doesn't take a lot to go over to any place you can find podcasts. Type in K-12 education, and you're going to get a list of podcasts, including Shifting Schools, where we are constantly having conversations with thought leaders. We're having conversations with teachers. We're having conversations with school leaders. All of these conversations are learning. And how do we bring that into our classroom? And that is what Podcast PD is. How do we bring that flexibility that audio allows into our schools? So over on the Shifting Schools website, you can find Podcast PD under our offerings, and we have set up those structures for you. If you want to do this as a team, maybe your team is focused on DEIJ work and you want to go and you can download the podcast for Pride Month. And we have the podcast for you to start listening to. We have the frames as adults to structure your conversation around what are we learning. What a great way for educators to start using podcasts with kids is to start using it for our own professional growth as well. And again, they're free. They're everywhere that you find podcasts. Just go to any of your podcast players, type in K-12 education. I hope you subscribe to Shifting Schools, but there's a ton of them out there that just are creating incredible content. They it's hard to put into words how incredible this is. And it's such a force that I think we really need to tap into both in school. I mean, even just having it playing in your background when the kids leave at the end of the day and you're grading papers, instead of listening to music, what if you just had a podcast playing in the background? What could you be picking up through that? I mean, there's so many little moments in the day that we could just tap into that's really what Podcast PD is about. But we've got the structures there for you over on the website. So head over to our, shiftingschools.com. And when you go to on offer, you'll see Podcast PD. We've got everything there for you to get started. We also have a pathway that we have created all about getting started with podcasting. And right now, though, it's on sale for $25. You can go over there and download this. This is actually gives you everything. There's a video of how to get started making podcasts with your students. Maybe you want to make a podcast for your school community. I am more and more school districts starting to create podcasts for their community. What a great way to reach out. Podcasting is becoming one of the most popular ways to reach our communities. And so as schools, how are we doing that? And I ran podcasts with my students back when I was a fourth grade teacher. When I was working at the International School of Bangkok, we had Bangkok Radio, which was kids who after school would come together. We formed a club and we did a podcast every day after school. We taught them about Creative Commons music. They were finding all of these artists. We were interviewing up and coming artists who were giving their music away for free to other high school kids. And we were playing it like a radio station. So many different ways that you can use podcasts with kids. And that's what this pathway is about. We talk about what are the tools that you need? What are some things that you might want to purchase when you kind of get started, or how you can do it all completely free. That's a great way to start podcasting as well, is you can get started for free, show that there's some advantages there, and then go and pay for a better mic and pay for a place to host it. But such a great way to get started in podcasting. So head over to shiftingschools.com and you can look for that Getting It with Podcasting PD.
Now, we've had some, I think, really great recent episodes on the Shifting Schools podcast. And Jeff, we often will get emails, and it had us thinking, we want our audience to be able to join the show, right? It shouldn't just always be a one-way conversation. So perhaps last week you caught our episode with author Linda Flanagan, who had some really provocative things to say in terms of sharing the research behind her most recent book that looks at youth sports and looks at play. So over on our homepage, when you head to shiftingschools.com, you'll notice things look a little bit different. And we've added in a great space where you can just click and send us a voicemail. So again, Jennifer Lagarde is on the podcast this week. She was talking about the intersection of social emotional learning and information literacy. If your school's working on that and you want to join the conversation, you also want to share your thoughts on the podcast, Jeff just showed how easy it is. So right there on the homepage, you scroll down, you will find that maroon microphone button. Send us a voicemail. We would love to hear from our audience, from our listeners. It just takes a few moments. So if you've got thoughts on a previous episode, or you've got some thoughts on what you would like to see discussed in an upcoming episode, we always love hearing from listeners.
Yeah. And who knows, if you give us permission, we might reach out to you and ask if we can use your recording as one of our as part of a podcast. So that's always a great way to do it as well. And you'll find, again, over there on our website, we're all focused. What this webinar is about, we are really focused on shifting schools. We drop a new episode every Monday. We've had some incredible episodes over the summer, and we've got an incredible lineup coming up. It's just been fantastic. And so head over to shiftingschools.com. Again, big updates just came out this week. If you've been over to the website before, we've made it easier to get to our 60 free guides, just one click now at the top, and everything about our podcast over there for you to join the newsletter, which Tricia does such a great job of adding extra value in as well. Well, Tricia, we did pretty good. We're only 5 minutes over our 15-minute flash webinar, which is not bad for us. We give it a shot. Again, as we wrap this up, just a big shout out to our sponsor, FlexiSpot, for allowing this to happen. Again, you can use that code SHIFTING20 to save $20 on your Pro Plus standing desk. That's the E7 desk over there at FlexiSpot.com. And also check out everything else they've got over there. If you're doing flexible seating in your classroom, they've got some incredible pieces of furniture over there that I think would fit in some flexible classroom situations as well. So check them out and thank them again for being a sponsor of Shifting Schools and this live webinar. Tricia, thank you so much. Podcasting is incredible. It's such a great way to learn with our students. It's such a great way for us to learn as individuals as well. Again, you're going to want to scan that, or if you're over on YouTube or in LinkedIn, you could probably just click in the description of this and get the link to that as well. We also drop that over in the chat on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you should get that over there in the chat as well. And of course, you can find these all at shiftingschools.com under our free resource guide. Thank you, Tricia, again for everything. Appreciate it. Until next time, we'll see you all on the network.